Hey everyone, Jawad here with Hit the Apex podcast. How is everyone doing? Hope everyone is well out there, wherever you are in the world. I'm doing all right. Nice to have a day off and a day to just look after one's mental health as well, because very important that. And relaxing watching the NBA playoffs today. Just saw the Golden State Warriors eliminate the Denver Nuggets to move on into the Western Conference semis. And sadly for the Nuggets, with plenty of injuries then, and Nikola Jokic pretty much carrying them, couldn't quite extend this series. But I'm happy for the Warriors as well, because it's been two seasons they've not been able to make playoffs. They've had injuries. Klay Thompson's been out for that long, and he's back there with his splash brother Steph Curry. So I have a feeling they'll go on and win. Just makes me happy because I am not a fan of those pylon teams. Sorry, Lakers and Nets fans, but yeah, going after the best players or whatever, splashing the cash. Prefer a team that has loyalty to its players and coaches as well. So that's a big thing. Anyway, you're probably wondering, hang on, you're a racing podcast, why are we talking basketball? But it was just nice to sit and enjoy some NBA earlier today. But yeah, we've got some racing to talk about. Had the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix over the weekend. Going to go over that. Not the most entertaining race. A lot of people have made their thoughts pretty clear about that, but as with any Formula One race weekend, there's plenty of storylines and things to take away from it. That's why we do what we do. People who do podcasts and create content, if it was purely boring, then you wouldn't be talking about anything. So that in itself is interesting. Maybe think on that. But yeah, great for Red Bull. Not so great for Ferrari. Great for McLaren. Not for Mercedes either, which we'll go into. Maybe we'll talk about Miami, which is the next race in a couple of weeks' time, or less, more, just over 7 days' time, I should say. And the Supercars Championship as well, which is back in Perth for the first time in 2 years too. So they've finally opened up their borders so people can actually go in and come back from WA. So Red Bull essentially spoiling the Ferrari party in Tifosi Heartland. Max Verstappen walking away with a Grand Slam as well. Pole position, fastest in the sprint, or won the sprint race, fastest lap in the race, led every single lap. Sorry, I just, it was like, what makes up a Grand Slam again? Was leading every lap, and then of course won the race. And something Red Bull desperately needed, you got to say, after the first 3 races. I mean, Max did win the second round in Saudi, but the other 2 races he failed to finish because of reliability problems. So walking away with maximum points over the weekend, you see what I did there? Maximum, bad joke. Maximum points, and actually the most ever points anyone scored in an F1 weekend, courtesy of the 8 points now on the table if you win the sprint, and then of course the fastest lap point, and then 25 points for the win. So walking away with a big haul of points there, and actually taking a chunk out of the lead. Championship leader Charles Leclerc, and we'll go into his weekend as well in a bit more detail, because he did throw away quite a few points with a mistake of his own. First Red Bull 1-2 finish as well since the 2016 Malaysian Grand Prix. So, significant race, Malaysia 2016. When you look back to that year's championship, and it feels like an eternity ago that year, and that was the last time we saw Red Bull actually get a 1-2. So, it's been slim pickings for them. I mean, when you look at the success that they had last year in particular, it was surprising that they didn't have a 1-2 finish. But yeah, going back to Malaysia 2016, the day Daniel Ricciardo won ahead of Max Verstappen, and Sergio Perez backing up Verstappen on this day. and really doing a good job this season. I mean, no one probably has anything bad to say about Checo. It's all looking good for him, for his future at Red Bull, you got to say, particularly while Verstappen is there, because, like we saw with the relationship between Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton the last 5 years at Mercedes, I think this is the kind of relationship we are seeing between Perez and Verstappen as well, and it's only going to make them stronger when the second driver does a good job. And, Perez doesn't seem too bothered about, championship, or who knows, we haven't really heard him talk about it. He's very much in the team player mindset, and it's really good to see, because he almost wasn't going to be on the grid last year until Red Bull threw him a bone and said, we like the way you race and we need that within our team, considering the last two drivers that they had in the car after Daniel Ricciardo left didn't really work out. So great for Red Bull. Ferrari, I guess, Leclerc, he's been pretty flawless this season so far up until this point, and his weekend basically was highlighted by the mistake he made 10 laps from the end of the race. He ended up in P6, threw away an unlikely, he threw away what would have been a likely podium finish with a fastest lap potentially. But, mistake was made. We'll go over that in a bit more detail when we recap how the race panned out. But ending up sixth is how he has lost quite a bit of his lead in the championship. He came in with 46 points over Max Verstappen. Max wasn't even in P2 yet. Now it has been cut to 27 points. So it's game on again in this year's World Championship, like, a lot of people expected. Some people thought, Ferrari will run away from it, but, it's just the way that it all ebbs and flows. First weekend as well that we had the sprint return for 2022. So it was somewhat of a success last year. We had a good one in Silverstone, Monza, and then Sao Paulo, but I guess the one that we saw here in Imola, we saw some good overtakes. There was some criticism, of course, coming from George Russell and Mercedes, saying that, they're focusing on the overtakes at the front, but in the midfield and at the rear of the field, it wasn't really easy. But, that's, I guess, Mercedes in general, their car just doesn't seem to like overtaking, unless you are George Russell, of course. More on that a bit later. But given the fact that Friday running was wet, and you only have, on a sprint weekend, you have 2 practice sessions, one on Friday, one on Saturday, then the 1 hour qualifying session, the traditional qualifying on the Friday, having had only 2 hours of running on Friday, including qualifying, and of course being in the wet, it made Saturday an unknown in the dry. So the fact that they only had 1 more practice session on Saturday before the sprint race, Charles Leclerc, eager to get up on Max. He got ahead of him at the start, Max having a gear sync issue, but of course gets caught later on in the race and passed, with the Ferrari having overworked the soft tyre. So pushing a bit too hard to stay in front. Ferrari perhaps not having the pace that they had in Melbourne, which saw them so dominant. And that's the interesting thing, that, we kind of have like track specific, pace this year, or cars doing better on certain tracks, something that, is always been a part of Formula One. But when you've had one team in particular dominating for the last decade or whatever, then it kind of falls by the wayside. So, we saw Ferrari untouchable in Melbourne, but they come here, they're on the back foot, Red Bull favouring these conditions a bit more. So Max was able to get back past ahead and ended up winning the sprint. We saw Carlos Sainz eager to impress as well after his disaster of a weekend in Australia, and it wasn't looking too good for him in qualifying, of course. Had a crash at the end of Q2 and then qualified 10th, I think, but did move up in the sprint to 4th behind Checo Perez as well, who just relishes sprint conditions and race conditions in general, except for Silverstone last year, of course, which was pretty disastrous for him. And while we're talking about Carlos Sainz, he, coming into the weekend, Ferrari, and he announced that they signed a new agreement as well, which sees him remain at Ferrari until the end of 2024. So basically on running to the same duration as Charles Leclerc's contract. So it's really important for those two to stay together, and, build the team that they're building around them as well, or the team that's been built around them, by Mattia Binotto and co. And they don't seem eager to shake things up anytime soon. So I think that's really important, given that after Australia especially, a lot of question marks were being asked of Sainz and his headspace and whether he's actually cut up for Ferrari in this sort of form where they're fighting for a championship and whatnot. Is he just going to be the rear gunner or whatever? But, Ferrari see his importance and his worth, whether it is going to be as Leclerc support driver or, a solid points contributor or championship contender, whatever, in the future. They want to see him next to Leclerc until the end of 2024. So that was really good for him. We saw Kevin Magnussen as well. Like, coming into the weekend, there were people who were predicting that Haas could even win the sprint race. Now, that sounds bizarre. In, some fantasy world, it might have come true if there was wet weather again on Saturday. But Magnussen, he qualified 4th on the Friday. It was Haas's best qualifying result. But then in the sprint, he did drop to 8th, but still got a point as part of the new points system in a sprint race. So he got a point there on Saturday, 2 points again on Sunday for them. Coming into the race itself, the track was wet for the start. They all started on the intermediate tyres. Max gets a good start and off into the distance, while we have an incident between Daniel Ricciardo and Carlos Sainz at the Tamburello chicane. Not second time in 2 races that Sainz hasn't made it beyond the first couple of laps, so that was quite disappointing for him to be out of this one already. And then Daniel Ricciardo, what do you say? And now that McLaren have started to find some form again as well, we saw Lando Norris finish on the podium this weekend. The bells are beginning to toll again for Ricciardo, like they were last year before he took that victory at Monza. And what do you say? Like, he was signed to the team to be kind of that spearhead driver at the time. It wasn't known whether, Lando was going to be kind of the de facto leader of the team. Ricciardo's the established race winner. He brings all this gravitas and marketing, stuff to the team, fits in with the team culture or whatever. But just for whatever reason, it hasn't worked. So a lot of questions are going to be asked of Ricciardo. Talks of his future potentially. He is with the team till 2024 as well, or till the end of next year, I should say 2023, the 3-year deal that he signed when he first came over. But after that, or even before that, there possibly could be changes, possibly an American IndyCar driver might come over, as has been speculated. So Ricciardo apologising to Sainz, of course, after the race. I guess that's nice of him to do that, but then just, again, wastes the opportunity that he had by qualifying or starting the race in 6th after a good sprint on Saturday. And, another chunk of points lost for McLaren, as was for Ferrari with Sainz. But in this instance, it wasn't really Sainz's fault, because where was he going to go? And there was no penalties given. It was deemed as a racing incident. So for Daniel, it basically just became a race of survival. He was at the back of the field. He became the first driver to switch over to the medium tyre. Everyone then followed suit at that point. Sebastian Vettel, another one, coming in after that. And then we saw the leaders come in on lap 19. So Checo being the first one to pit, and then Max and Leclerc on the next lap coming in. And Checo was overcut by the Ferrari, but his pace was too good. He was able to get himself back ahead of Leclerc, and just Leclerc could not match the pace of the Red Bulls all weekends. And while Red Bull were leading comfortably 1-2, Ferrari decided to pit for a second time to get the soft tyres on. My guesses was that perhaps their strategy was to go for the fastest lap and settle for third. But for whatever reason, we saw obviously Perez and Verstappen pit again for the soft tyres as well, thinking, oh, well, we also have time in our hand. We can do fastest lap as well, get the fastest lap, get that extra point. And then we saw Leclerc chasing after Perez rather aggressively. When he closed in on the Red Bull, but he goes into the curb at Variante Alta too hard. It's like we saw him driving a supercar or something, one of the V8 supercars, because they go over the curb so aggressively and they can get away with it. But, in a Formula 1 car, that's not very advisable. Hits the curb too hard, comes out, spins, hits the wall. Lucky he didn't damage the car enough for it to just stay there and retire from the race and get 0 points. He was able to come back into the pits, get a new front wing, and go out and overtake a bunch of cars to finish 6th. But he should have just settled for third and fastest lap. I mean, I had a moment, in my rather tired state at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning on Monday on F1 Chronicle, the Grid Talk podcast, saying, is this the same old Ferrari mistakes that we're going to see this year, like we saw in 2017 and in 2018, in particular with Sebastian Vettel, where, they finally have a car worthy of going after the championship, but then it's the driver that makes the mistake, it's the team that makes mistakes, strategists or whatever. Are they ever just going to get it together? And, early season evidence, the first 3 races were like, it's all looking really good. They haven't put a foot wrong yet, but then inevitably they put a foot wrong. And then that lead that Leclerc had, 46 points over Max, cut to 27 now. And, it's 26 points on a normal weekend that you can get. So if Max has another good weekend like he did and Leclerc has a bad weekend or whatever, I know this sounds very Will Buxton, but then, Max will be leading the championship or within a point. But yeah, what else do you say about Ferrari with the way that Leclerc went after it? I mean, having said that, after Melbourne, it was one of his most mature drives. He seems like he is ready to fight for it. And then even when he was fighting with Verstappen wheel to wheel in the opening races, that, he's got the mental capacity to do that now. What happened in Imola? Was it because of the pressure of the Tifosi being in front of being on home soil for Ferrari? And, that's what Ferrari does, is put that extra pressure on you. I think you just have to. It's easy for me to sit here and say in my comfortable chair that you just have to try and put that behind you, ignore it, and just treat it like any other race. I mean, this is of course a marathon and not just a sprint. Even though, you could say, oh, sprint race this weekend. It's a marathon. You've got 23 races. I think so. I mean, if they have a replacement for Russian Grand Prix, it'll be 23 races this year. You've got still all of the season to go. Like, let's just say 19 races to go this season. That's a long time. And to be making mistakes this early, especially when your rival has had 2 races already where they've scored 0 points, and now to then gift them essentially more points by making a mistake like that. That's all on the driver. You don't know if that's it's going to be enough for them to win at the end of the year. So you'd hope that they learn from this. You'd hope that Leclerc learns from this as well and doesn't repeat the same mistake. Otherwise, it's, you're basically back in Sebastian Vettel 2017, 2018 Ferrari territory, where, he makes a mistake and then it turns into like a run of mistakes, and then before you know it, Max Verstappen can wrap up the championship by Mexico or the United States Grand Prix in Texas, like we saw Hamilton do all those years ago. So let's hope that that's not the case. But it's a dire warning, to perhaps not end up in that boat again. So Red Bull crossing the line 1-2, Leclerc in 6th, Lando Norris inheriting 3rd place, and a good reward for McLaren, you got to say, after the first 2 races and, such a difficult test in Bahrain, where all that encouraging pace that they had in Barcelona and the form that they had in Barcelona pre-season basically got flipped on its head. It's like, oh, this is where we're hitting panic buttons and it's disaster for McLaren again. It's back to the Honda days or whatever. They still finished, 18 seconds behind the race lead. They're still not quite there on the 1-lap pace in terms of qualifying, but Lando just gets it done. He pulls the weekend together. He was strong in qualifying on Friday, strong again in the sprint, even though he lost a couple of places and dropped to 5th. But to be there in the race, he had a lonely race, but to be there in 4th would have still been a great finish for him, but to then be rewarded with that podium, I think is great, not only for himself, but the team especially, who've stuck with him and also stuck with what they've got at the moment. They've not even had any significant upgrades since the start of the season. That will most likely come in Barcelona in another race's time or whatever. So to have a car that, it struggled in Bahrain and in Saudi, Melbourne they did well. Here they've had a podium as well, 2nd podium in 2 years for Lando in Imola as well. Such a strong weekend, and to also be the 3rd fastest car, the fastest Mercedes-powered car as well, which I'll talk about Mercedes themselves in a second, but you can't really fault Lando and McLaren in that instance, and hopefully the upgrades that they will be bringing in a couple of races' time will put them into that top of the midfield, like contention, or put them in that position firmly. Well, when you look at where Ricciardo finished, down in 18th and last of the classified runners, basically, it's like, if you had both cars up there, it would look a lot better for the championship, a lot better for the Constructors' Championship, which they are currently in 4th position, ahead of the likes of Alpine and AlphaTauri, but behind Mercedes still. But, that could very much change still, depending on how things play out. And we're on the subject of Mercedes now. George Russell, excellent weekend from him again, backing up the podium that he had in Melbourne with 4th, and I think the only driver this season to have been finished in the top 5 in the opening races so far, opening 4 races. So another little good feat, another feat for him to celebrate. Good job. He had a great start, actually. He ended the sprint race in 11th, so started 11th on the grid for the actual Grand Prix. Worked his way up the field, passed a bunch of cars, and was looking handy in 4th there. Would have been 5th if it wasn't for the Leclerc retirement. All while his teammate finished 13th. His teammate, the 7-time world champion, Lewis Hamilton, down in 13th. Didn't qualify in the top 10 on Friday. Couldn't make it out of the bottom 10 either in the sprint, so was 14th at the end of the sprint race, and basically only made up a position because Esteban Ocon was hit by a 5-second time penalty for actually for an unsafe release during the pit stop phase, which saw him come out in front of Hamilton rather unsafely. So Hamilton actually lost a bunch of time because of that, but he could not get past Pierre Gasly all race. He's basically stuck behind the AlphaTauri, couldn't pass, and shouldn't be, just because the fact that there was no DRS enabled for half of the race, even though there were calls that it should have been, even though they were still on intermediate tyres. But even when they switched to slick tyres, it took until like lap 34 or something for race control to turn on DRS, whether it was because of the big shunt that happened at Imola last year between George Russell and Valtteri Bottas going into turn one. They didn't feel confident given that the parts of the Tamburello chicane were still wet, so there would have been no grip and all that sort of safety jazz. But even with DRS, Hamilton could not do anything and was basically stuck behind Gasly for 13th. Worst weekend, you got to say, for Hamilton, and it doesn't really help when there's just a lot of negative press out there. There's all these insinuations, innuendos, whatever you want to say. There was apparently a verbal spat, if you want to call it, between Hamilton and Toto Wolff after qualifying. Hamilton still has his helmet on in the garage and Toto Wolff looking very animated. It was all in front of cameras or whatever. And, that's been blown out. And then you've got Hamilton saying as well in the interviews that, he's out of championship contention. And then all week I've basically seen on my timeline or on social media feeds, whether it's Instagram or Twitter, just posts coming out of Mercedes and Hamilton as well about, I'm not finished yet, or, he's our world champion and all that sort of thing. And, that's great. They want to keep themselves motivated and everything like that. But I feel like it's too early to hit the panic rooms, to be pushing the panic button. It's like, it's all a bit unnecessary. And I know this is the team that's won 8 world championships on the bounce. They've won 7 drivers' championships in that time since 2014. They've been the dominant team of the sport. But we're 4 races into a new cycle of regulations. And change of regulations is something that Mercedes have stayed on top of even during even since 2014 when we switched to the aerodynamic beasts that we had in 2017, and then the changes in 2019 as well with the front wings and all. And then it was until 2021 where the subtle floor changes kind of unsettled them and put Red Bull on top. But yeah, to be, in a state of panic and stuff. I mean, of course, a team that's won, for so long is probably not used to losing, and a worst result for them would have been like a DNF for one car, or like a double DNF, which has only happened a handful of times, or not even a handful of times since 2014. So, to me, I feel like if, they're ruling themselves out of championship contention this season, which, okay, fine, you still have a whole season to go. There's a lot to learn about this new era of car. There's a lot of points on the table. Ricciardo even said earlier in the season about his own team that, he wouldn't be surprised if they won a race this year, even though they're where they were form-wise and car-wise or whatever. That could be true for Mercedes too. So, it's not like Hamilton's untouched record of winning a race every season since he started in F1 back in 2007 is at risk or anything. It could still yet happen with 19 races to go. But to me, this is just going to be one of those seasons where it might define the character of the Mercedes team. It might define how good of a leader Toto Wolff is. Sure, he's been there for all the good days and all the victories and whatnot, and they've had some bad days too. But to get themselves out of where they are at the moment, where they're not going to be fighting for a championship, they don't understand their car, they're nowhere really. That's going to define leadership. It's going to define, hopefully, Hamilton's leadership as well within the team, his experience. He's obviously, as a 7-time world champion and having had some of the best machinery under him throughout his tenure in Formula One, can give the feedback necessary to the engineers and designers to look to a new direction, or to see if they can improve the development direction that they're going in with this car or the concept of this car and whatnot. So I feel like, all the negative stuff that's going on in the world and social media and the press about them is kind of just, I think it's just unnecessary. Instead, we should probably judge them, at the end of the season when, we see how it's all turned out, because they could very well, with a single upgrade package, turn their fortunes around, be like, oh, okay, so that's what's causing all the porpoising issues we're having, and this is what's going to fix it. Great, because it's not like all the greatest engineering minds that Mercedes have had for the last 8 years have disappeared or whatever. They're all still there. James Allison has been an instrumental part of that, obviously, since he came over to the team in, I think, 2017 or 2018 or whatever it was. They may have lost, Andy Cowell on the engine side from Brixworth or whatever, but it's the power unit thing cannot be fixed anyway, because they're frozen until the new regs come in 2026. So it's all to do with the car, all to do with the porpoising, and everyone else is in the same boat. They're all trying to figure out what's going wrong. It's obviously a lot worse for Mercedes, because their car with the porpoising is suffering and has no lap time, has no pace or anything like that. So, it's all going to be a big test for them, and especially in this cost cap era as well. They can't just throw money at the problem and expect it to disappear like Lawrence Stroll does. It's going to take a lot more decision making and being smart about it to be able to see how it all works. And that is the hallmark of a great team like Mercedes. So I have faith that they are not going to be done or defeated by this, or it's not over for anyone thinking that, oh, Lewis Hamilton is going to quit now because of this or whatever. If he does, then it would kind of leave a bad taste in my mouth. I'm sure a lot of other people's mouths would say, oh, he can't deal with having a bad car or whatever, or not winning all the time. So it's up to him and his leadership, Toto Wolff and all, to get together and say, look, we either cut our losses with this car and look towards next year, because, of course, with the sliding scale of aero development, depending on where you are in the Constructors' Championship, actually finishing a bit lower might be beneficial for them for the next year or whatever, in terms of the wind tunnel runs and testing. I'm not saying that they should tank this season, but instead of throwing their resources at trying to turn this season around, just focus more on next year and try and trial some stuff this year for next year, bring some experimental upgrades, and all within the confines of the budget cap, of course. So there's plenty of possibilities, and I think giving up and being all negative about it is not going to be the solution to it. And when you look at the end of the day as well, George Russell, 4th race for Mercedes this, or 5th race if you include Sakir Grand Prix a couple of years ago, he's not finished outside the top 5 in a single one. He's been on the podium, as has Lewis, of course, in the first race, finished 4th again on the weekend. I mean, just because the boy's used to driving a bad car, he knows how to get the most out of it. We still have to appreciate the fact that, he's doing really well at the moment. I don't want that to be something that's ignored amongst all the stuff going on with Hamilton and stuff. So, yeah, it's a tough one, but also it's something that, we shouldn't all get too swept up in. We shouldn't all start making it out like it's the end of the world, it's the end of an era or whatever. After all, Formula One is such a cyclical cyclical sport, and teams' successes come and go. I mean, Mercedes, the best thing about Mercedes, and the worst thing about Mercedes, if you're one of those neutral fans or fans of any other team, is that, their success that they've had since 2014 has lasted such a long time. When you look back at Ferrari in the 2000s with Michael Schumacher, McLaren in the late 80s, early 90s with Ayrton Senna, Alan Prost, Williams as well in their dominant days, it only lasted at most 4 years, 5 years or whatever. But for Mercedes and Red Bull as well, 4 years. But Mercedes for the better part of 8 years have been at the top of the sport, and that doesn't come without some of the greatest engineering minds and tactical minds and just team players coming together and creating such a great team. And I think the biggest challenge in a most positive way is to this great team is to try and turn themselves around from where they are at the moment, in the little hole that they are, to, if not, have a year where they finish third or fourth in the constructors, to, get ready to be in title contention for next year, having better understood this car, and be like, right, Hamilton, go out there and win that 8th world championship, and then you can retire, kind of thing. Don't just walk away now where, you're going to look like a salty individual who can't stand not being able to win or whatever. So it's going to be a test for everyone, but there's no need to get the negativity out there just yet. So I think I've made my point very clear on that. Drop me a line if you disagree, of course, at Hit the Apex Media on Twitter and all. But I feel like I've made my point clear about it, and I wish them best of luck, because they are one of the great teams in Formula One, and if they can turn themselves around quicker than Ferrari have in the last decade, since the last time they won a championship, that only makes them better than Ferrari, in my opinion, and of course Red Bull as well, since 2014. So that's those guys. Talking while we're on the subject of Mercedes, their former driver in Valtteri Bottas had one of his best weekends as well for Alfa Romeo, finishing in 5th. So he did well in the sprint, was 7th, and then finished the race in 5th. If it wasn't for a slow pit stop that he had, he would have finished in 4th ahead of Russell. So they both battled to the finish line without crashing, of course, like they did last year. But how good is it looking for those guys at the moment, or particularly for Valtteri Bottas when he is finishing ahead of his former team? Made a pretty good decision, did old Valtteri, to get out of there, perhaps, you could say. And also Max Verstappen having lapped Lewis Hamilton as well over the weekend. That would have been an interesting moment for Red Bull fans, and maybe not so for Hamilton and Mercedes fans, seeing that happen. Behind them, we had Leclerc in 6th, and then he passed Yuki Tsunoda and Sebastian Vettel when he switched to the fresh soft tyres after the crash that he had when he lost his chance at the podium. But for those two in particular, they would have celebrated points regardless, especially Sebastian Vettel and Aston Martin after the weekend that they had in Australia. You had not only Vettel finishing in 8th, but also Stroll in 10th too. So both Aston Martin scoring points and getting themselves on the board in the Constructors' Championship, which means all the teams have now scored a point, which I think is the quickest the entire field in a F1 season have scored points. It's only taken 4 races, so it just shows you how competitive and how jumbled the order is at the moment. Vettel doing rather well. It's what you expect to see from him, but still Aston Martin not quite where they want to be competitively and, just performance-wise. Stroll in 10th as well, ahead of Alex Albon, who, again, puts in an amazing performance. Qualifies 18th in the sprint race, goes on to finish P11. He outshone his teammate Nicholas Latifi again, which again, Latifi coming under a bit of scrutiny over his future there at Williams. An interesting quote that I picked up on the weekend as well, and a reminder of something that Williams had said coming into this season is that, you know, they're not in a position like previous years where they have to rely on income from a driver for a driver to be able to race, you know. So, you know, basically referring to the fact that, you know, the last few seasons they've had to rely on Latifi's sponsorship money and whatnot to be able to race and give him a seat essentially. So, you know, the decision to keep Latifi on this season was made purely on merit in that instance. And, you know, when you look at the way Latifi was last year, he did quite well, scored some points, you know, was looking competitive at times, but still not obviously as good as Russell. But the way that this season has started out for him, it is very, very dire. You know, the fact that we don't have a certain Russian driver in the sport anymore means that, you know, Latifi's kind of the butt of the jokes at the moment. Not that, you know, being the butt of the jokes means that you should keep a seat in Formula One or not, but at the same time, because, you know, we've got one L Stroll racing for Aston Martin on a a lifetime contract basically. But for Latifi, he's going to have to turn his performance around. Like, Albon didn't score points this time, but to go from 18th to 11th is impressive, especially when you look at Oscar Piastri waiting in the wings and his name being linked to possible Williams switch next year. It's looking more likely that Alpine will stick with the status quo and perhaps even offer Fernando Alonso a multi-year deal or 2-year deal to stay the team with Esteban Ocon. So where does Piastri go then? Obviously, he's the Alpine reserve and test driver this season. They'd be silly not to have him on the grid next year, the reigning Formula 2 champion. So Williams seems like a team that would be good for him, and that would be great to see two genuinely quick drivers and not a pay driver driving for Williams. You know, Albon obviously didn't have a great time at Red Bull and was outshone by Verstappen. But, you know, being here at Williams, you know, if he had someone like Piastri in the team, how would that go for him? You know, it would be nice to see them both kind of at each other and develop. And, you know, there's still other options on the grid as well. It's really hard. I was trying to think about how the silly season would play out in my head earlier today, and it looks a bit jumbled because while you have all those key seats filled, you only have to look at Aston Martin, Alfa Romeo, Haas, all those other seats. McLaren potentially as well with Daniel Ricciardo. There could be changes for next year. So there's still a lot that can play out. We could have a very different grid next year, certainly in the midfield and at the back of the field. But only time will tell how that pans out. Going back to Kevin Magnussen and Haas, he finished 9th in the race, so that was quite good for them. Unfortunately for Mick Schumacher, his 10th on the grid after the sprint race was wasted because he got hit by Fernando Alonso on the first lap, which led to Alonso retiring and then Schumacher finishing down in 17th. So, you know, there's even been questions about young Mick, whether he's cut for F1 or not, or whether he's going to stay put at Haas for next season. He's got a teammate now which is proven and is an actual talented driver, and so far young Mick has not been able to best him, but it's still quite early days yet in the season, and we know that typically from other championships that Schumacher has raced in, that he does come better in his second season. So hopefully we will see that as the season progresses, and he can keep his seat at Haas. But also, most importantly, we want Oscar Piastri on the grid for next year. And ending there with Guan Yu Zhou going from pit lane to P15, obviously having that crash in the sprint race with Pierre Gasly. They couldn't, they had to start from the pit lane after Alfa Romeo rebuilt that car, and even he made it to 15th ahead of Latifi. So, but we know the Alfa Romeo is a more competitive car, so if Latifi fancies that he's better than Zhou, then he's not really doing anything to show that at the moment. So, yeah, that kind of wraps up wraps up the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. Can have a look at the standings if we want real quickly, see where everyone's at. So, as I said, 27 points at the top of the table between Leclerc and Verstappen. Perez has moved up into third as well. Russell in fourth ahead of Sainz and Norris, while Lewis Hamilton has slumped to seventh and only 4 points ahead of Valtteri Bottas, who's in the Alfa Romeo. And then, you've got Esteban Ocon, Kevin Magnussen rounding out the top 10, and only two drivers currently on the grid without points, and that's Mick Schumacher and Nicholas Latifi. And in terms of the standings, Latifi is still behind Nico Hülkenberg, who subbed in for Seb Vettel in the opening two races, albeit scoring 0 points, but it just depends on who had the higher finish, and unfortunately Latifi has not had a higher finish than Hülkenberg's two results in the opening two races, so that's not looking good for him. And then in the Constructors' Championship as well, Ferrari is only now 11 points ahead of Red Bull in first, Mercedes in third, comfortably ahead of McLaren for now, and then McLaren comfortably ahead of Alfa, Alpine, and the other Alfa being an AlphaTauri, and Haas. They're kind of, four teams battling over fifth at the moment. And then you got Aston Martin and Williams at the rear, with Aston Martin jumping ahead finally. So next up, we've got the Miami Grand Prix, the first race, first time, I should say, that F1's going to Miami. You're going to think that F1 will be doing everything they can to make that event a success, even though the fake yacht club that they've got looks pretty horrible. People have been laughing at pictures that they've released of the track at the moment. They've got a concrete car park and some yachts parked in it, where there should be some water or whatever. So I don't know what's going on with that. It's pretty silly. I've already made my thoughts clear, on street circuits like Jeddah, and then of course, even though we didn't race at Vietnam, I still didn't like the track. Yeah, we don't need more of those. I mean, it's good for them and their plans of trying to get F1 more popular in the US or whatever, but like we've got, too many races in the Middle East at the moment. 2 races in America will be enough. Like, if Miami fails, and they keep Vegas and COTA, that'd be great. Obviously, they've had some trouble with some locals having protested against, noise and whatnot, that it's going to be disruptive and damaging to the community and everything like that, and they went to court and they lost. It does sound a little bit like Albert Park in that instance, but then look at the benefits of having a race in Melbourne and Albert Park has done for local business and all that. So even though Miami seems completely the opposite, because it seems like a race only for the rich and exclusive, because tickets apparently cost a fortune, and I don't think anyone fancies paying an arm and a leg to be seen there, as will be the case with Vegas, I hear. So yeah, there goes any plans I have of possibly going there in 2023. Other things going around, hearing this morning that the race directors, both Niels Wittich and Eduardo Freitas, have tested positive for COVID. What a situation. I mean, I thought, they'd be alternating roles and not being there together every weekend. Or, they are alternating, only one person is really in charge, but I didn't think that both would be at a race every weekend like I saw in Australia. I'm like, oh, cool, Niels Wittich, he's on all the documentation this weekend. He's the racing director. And then I see Eduardo Freitas just chilling, doing his thing. I'm like, well, it's nice to see you, of course, but why two of you together? The point of I thought the point of having alternating race directors was to possibly avoid a situation like this, and now both have tested positive for COVID, which I hope they recover in time for Miami. But what will happen if they both cannot partake in the directing of the race in Miami? Does that mean they call Nico Hülkenberg in? Just super sub Hulkenberg, Hulkenbach 4.0. Do they throw a bone to Michael Massey? That would be quite interesting. That would be very interesting. I don't think that's going to happen, but I'm just throwing it out there. It would be quite interesting. But the more like logical solution would, I think, to be put Herbie Blash in that position, of course. But who knows if that will happen either. So, yeah, not looking good. Not good news in terms of that. We had Ross Brawn as well earlier in the week talking about F1 looking at the possibility of 6 sprint races again in 2023. That was originally what was the plan for this year, but I guess off the mixed feedback from 2021 where they trialled them on 3 occasions, they just thought maybe 3 is enough and we'll go with that. So after the fact that we've succeeded with the first one in 2022, they're like, all right, let's do 6 again. And I think that'll change until that'll change again when the next one fails. So we'll wait and see when that happens. And when is the next sprint? I do not know for the life of me. So when it comes around, I'll let you know. I'm not going to go looking for it anyway at the moment. We'll move it on, though, to wrap things up. Supercars returning to Perth for the first time since 2019. Exciting as well, because after Perth, there will be a return to Winton here in Victoria as well. So return to Winton Motor Raceway for the first time since 2019 as well. Both of those venues having been skipped over the last 2 years because of the coronavirus pandemic. And also for Perth, especially WA, the Old West having been shut to the rest of the world for quite some time as well. So good for them to be open up again and to let the supercars come in and do their thing at Barbagallo Raceway. It's been a great stomping ground for the Shell V-Power Racing team, who've won the last 7 races there, dating back to 2017. So three consecutive years, 7 races. They've been successful there between Scott McLaughlin and Fabian Coulthard, of course, the old Shell V-Power team back in the DJR Team Penske days. Can they, though, this year go on and continue that success? I don't know, because it's not been a great start to the season for the old Ford Mustang, no matter whether it's at Tickford or the DGR team. Already talked about Will Davison last time, how, he just seems to be second best, but cannot quite get the job done. Like, can he actually come in and break that winless streak? He's had some success here before. 2012, it was an epic race where he and his FPR teammate Mark Winterbottom took on Jamie Whincup, and then of course it was such a close finish with it ending up as an FPR 1-2. That epic race in 2015 as well, where in the Erebus Mercedes-Benz he finished, he won essentially from last, I think it was as well. Such a race of heavy tyre degradation as well, so that's why you see kind of these drivers fall away at the end unless they're on the right tyre. So even though we've got a night race on Saturday, it is quite key to look after your tyres in this instance. But can Davison break through, because if he doesn't here, then where will he? Same for Anton De Pasquale, really, as well. You would have thought that he'd be up there. I mean, he's second in the championship, which is good. He's been consistent, but to actually get the win under his belt, could only do the world of wonders for your confidence. And when you also look at the fact that Shane Van Gisbergen has never won in Perth, I mean, that's quite extraordinary when you look at how much winning he's done in the last few years. But then again, we've only raced at Sydney Motorsport Park a million times in the last 2 years. So, of course, all these wins have come there. That's not true, by the way. SVG's highest finish has been P3. Unfortunately, he caught COVID after the Australian Grand Prix and the Melbourne 400, so he missed the Bathurst 6 hour over Easter. So hopefully he's doing okay as well, fitness-wise. We know it can catch a few drivers out when they do return immediately after having a bit of COVID, like we know in F1. So we'll see how Shane's doing there. But when you look at Triple Eight, they've been pretty successful in Perth as well, obviously, before DJR Team Penske did their handiwork from 2017 onwards. 2016, they had that iconic 1-2-3 finish, of course, with Craig Lowndes in the third car winning ahead of Jamie Whincup and Van Gisbergen. So, you know, they've done pretty well there. But also Chaz Mostert has done well there in the past as well for ProDrive and for Tickford. So could he have a good weekend in the online? Can never keep up with these sponsors. The Optus, Mobile One, Commodore, Walkinshaw, Andretti United. Get in there, Chaz. Get in there. Looking forward to it, though. It should be a good weekend. What time is the... It's 8:40 p.m. It's a good race for Europeans. If you're up in the morning, fancy watching some supercars, I think you'll be able to watch it this time as well, after what happened in Melbourne, not being able to watch the Melbourne 400 over there. So the Saturday night race in Perth will actually be good for the European audiences. And then, another pair of races on Sunday to round out the Perth Super Night. So, that pretty much wraps up this week's show. As always, find me on at Hit the Apex Media on Twitter, even though it's not very, I'm not actively as on it as other people are on their Twitters, but also you can follow the Linktree through to Instagram and my profile on the Raw for when I do my live blogging and articles. As always, I will return for the Miami Grand Prix review as well, so in a couple of weeks' time. But other than that, hope everyone stays well. Have a good weekend, whatever you're doing, and we'll see you then. Bye.